Good morning and happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Coffee Talk Live. This is my little talk show where guests and I explore what it looks like to live a sustainably healthy life as mothers, for ourselves, and in the community. So I'm your host, Connie Pastorius, founder of Pastorius Fitness, which is an online coaching community for moms who are ready to regain control of their life and reclaim their health. I'm also the founder and woman in charge at Strong as a Mother online community, a Facebook group for moms that sets the standard for what online fitness and nutrition support for women should be. So no diet, no MLM, no BS. Do me a favor, drop a 1 in the comments if you're watching live and a 2 if you're catching the replay. And either way, don't be shy. It's never too late to add your voice to the conversation. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the link in the description of this video to join a community of awesome, busy moms just like you. Now let's get to the reason why we're all here today. I'm excited for you to meet today's guest because in a very short time, she has become a dear friend of mine, and her story and expertise is something that I felt was one of those hard but important topics that we should talk about. So my guest is a certified substance abuse prevention specialist. Please welcome to the show, Miss Diana Hugh McDowell. Good morning, Diana.
Morning, Connie.
It's so good to see you from around the corner. So first question, yeah. And I was just wondering, did we become friends because of just like running into each other on the street one day? Is that how this started?
So I actually passed your house while you were hanging on the stoop. And I think you had Remy with you. I had Evan, and it was just meant to be.
Love at first sight.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And we started talking about our love of rock climbing. Our babies were born around the same time, like less than a month apart. And now we can't get rid of each other.
Exactly.
So tell me.
Shared
oh my gosh.
For food.
Yes. Oh, food is the best. All right. So question number 1, Diana, what do you got in the cup today?
So I'm not really that exciting. I'm just drinking tea right now. I already had my Nespresso at 7 o'clock this morning as I was getting my little boy ready for school. And so I'm just having a little tea right now.
What kind of tea do you like?
I kind of stick to the basics, like either Earl Grey or English breakfast, a little milk, a little sugar in my climbing mug.
Oh, yay.
It's warm. Yeah.
Oh, no, tea's great. I don't think it's basic at all. I mean, wasn't the British Empire like built on it or something?
Mm-hmm.
I love tea. Yeah, my coffee this is cup number 2. I still have the after effects of my daughter bringing yet another cold into the house. Whatever she gets, I'm like a magnet for germs. So I have a little bit of congestion, but it won't stop me from drinking my coffee. I will switch to tea in the afternoon because that tea with honey really helps my throat feel a little better, but I digress. So today is a unique conversation, or it's at least a little bit different because this is I think a harder conversation in the realm of wellness and health, but I think it's an important one because I think over the last year, a lot of us have leaned on various coping mechanisms to literally just survive what's been going on in the world. And as much as I talk about the importance of developing habits, like anything done in excess, it can lead you down an unhealthy path. And in this case of habits, it could lead to possible addiction. So you have a personal story with that, and I would love for you to share it with us if you're comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in this time that we've known each other, we haven't even, I don't think I've even shared my story with you. Like we know so much about each other, but we just haven't had a sit down to actually talk about, the big parts of our past. So I'll give you the quick 5-minute version. Um, I grew up in Hong Kong. And when I was 16, I moved from all-girl Catholic school in Hong Kong to New York City public school. From living with my protective mother to living with my very free-spirited, um, permissive father. And as great as it sounds, having unlimited freedom at the age of 16 is not, I realize now, not the most healthy setup for a naive, innocent 16-year-old girl. So I started hanging out and got introduced to alcohol pretty quickly. Um, and when I drank the first few times, it just did something to me. Today I know why. Like it's a psychoactive substance, it releases dopamine. But at the time, I just remember it making me feel more confident, less stressed. Remember, I'd never been around boys before. So when I was in these social settings with boys, it gave me that confidence and courage to talk to them. And it became a pretty regular thing in my life. I still did really well in school. So I think that threw my parents off. And my parents grew up in rural Taiwan. So they didn't know the first thing about this topic of recreational drugs. And so my alcohol use led to smoking, which led to occasional marijuana use and other illicit drug use. So by the time I was, in college, I was partying a lot, drinking a lot, and also using other illicit substances. But I was still going to college. I even had an internship working at a hedge fund in finance. I was looking back what you would call these days like a high functioning alcoholic or substance or somebody a high functioning person who is using substances, recreational substances. And there were consequences to my use, but I kind of ignored them or weren't able to see them or weren't able to really relate them back to my alcohol or other substance use. All of this culminated in my mid-20s when I went out with my best friend. We went to a party and, it was just another night out with me and my friend, and we got really drunk to the point of blacking out. And at some point we got into a car with a drunk driver. And he unfortunately lost control of the vehicle and crashed. And him and I were okay, but my best friend passed away a week later from traumatic brain injury. The girl who gave me my very first drink of alcohol, 10 years earlier, who became my best friend. And at that point, I really spiraled out of control. I moved back to China thinking that I would start my life over again and that I would just leave everything behind. But that's not really how trauma and life works. Wherever you go, there you are. And I drank for another probably 18 months while also going to grad school. So on the surface, you maybe wouldn't be able to tell that, I was an alcoholic, but because I was still going and getting my master's degree. But if you looked a little closer, I was really a mental, emotional, and relationship mess. So I finally got into recovery a few months later through this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm sure many people are aware of. And that changed my life. And that was 10 years ago. Last week was 10 years since I had my last drink and got into recovery. And well, I won't bore you with the rest because you know the present day Diana. fell in love, got married, bought a house, had a kid, got a dog, have another kid on the way. But like, just learn to live a life that's substance free and learn to be happy and love myself and heal the parts of myself that needed healing that were like, being covered through, you know, over a decade of substance use. So that's the short version. And now I actually work in this area, doing this kind of prevention in high schools, preventing substance abuse.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I never heard this story. I felt like, I think I heard maybe like here and there you mentioned like something about meetings or recovery or something, but I felt like when like I didn't need to pry when the time was right, we would have this conversation if you wanted to. And here we are now sharing it with other people, which I think is it's very awesome, and I really appreciate it. So was it through the program and through your recovery that you became a prevention specialist?
Yeah. And so 5 years into my recovery, I was at a meeting and I met a woman who was doing this work, and she's like, "Oh, you should come work for us." And when I heard what was entailed, like public speaking, assemblies, working with, parents, I was like, no, no, no. Like, I, I can't do that. But I was teaching yoga at the time, another interest you and I share. And I was like, I need something more to sustain me, to support me. And so I tried for I signed up and I tried the interview process. I went through the interview process, which is a really weird one if you think about it, because they're like, please give us a list of all the substances you've tried. And you're like, I've done this and I've done that. And they're like, okay, I think you're really qualified.
Huh.
So that was about 5 years ago. It just happened by chance, which a lot of things in my recovery have happened that way.
Great. So you've been doing this then now for 5 years, helping share and educate
Yeah.
high schoolers, which is really
Since
cool.
2015, so actually 6 years. Yeah.
All right. And it's really interesting. You mentioned about like the high functioning and a lot of people not knowing. When I knew my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago, but I never knew anything about any kind of substance abuse. I mean, like their house smelled like cigarettes, but like that's all I really knew about them and drinking. But like looking back, I never saw him with a beer in his hand. Same with my grandma. But when I moved into their house after my grandma went to a care facility and my grandfather passed away, me and my husband moved in so we could kind of like clean it up, renovate it, and then decide if we want to stay there or move. But I was cleaning out his basement. Like that was like there was a bar down there, which he was never at. And that was like his place that he always was. And I found all these chips. And I was like, oh my God, my pap was like an AA. And I never knew anything at all. And it's so interesting that like there's very, very intimate parts of even our closest families' lives that we don't even know about, and the importance of being kind and cognizant of how we have conversations about alcohol and about addiction and about chemicals and substances. So kind of leading this conversation forward, I want to discuss and kind of explore the particular definition of addiction, because that word gets kind of thrown around a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not surprised at your grandfather's story, because I feel like it is a difficult thing for people even to talk about now, but with an older generation. It's a lot of stigma associated with it, and some people don't even have like the proper language in talking about this. So on that topic of language, what exactly is addiction? There are different ways of defining it, but the one that I tend to use the most and my organization uses the most is a repetitive or compulsive use of a substance or performance of a behavior, because behaviors can be addictions too, despite negative consequences. So when you find yourself doing something over and over again, whether that's eating, sex, spending, drugs in a way that's compulsive. So there's like an irresistible urge to it and almost kind of like a loss of control of oneself, right? And it's causing you negative consequences. That could be social, financial, emotional, physical harm. Then that's when we would say a habit has crossed over into addiction. But it's really a spectrum, Connie. Like sometimes you'll hear me say substance abuse, and substance abuse is merely just the misuse of a substance that can be harmful. And then on the extreme end of substance abuse would be addiction. So if you keep doing that over and over again, then that's when the abuse crosses over into addiction. So those are kind of different ways to think about it. Thinking about it as like a spectrum rather than just like a black and white thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to talk about for a bit because our generation grew up with like the DARE program and just like drugs are bad, flat out. Like if it's a drug, if it's illegal, I'm sure they might have thrown cigarettes in at that point. I don't remember. I wasn't paying attention apparently. But we have even in culture, like in an episode of Law and Order, like, oh, he was an addict. Oh, he, did this. Oh, he was into drugs. Like they use these very general terms and don't explore just like you said, the spectrum. And I think it's important for, us to be more compassionate, more empathetic towards this behavior. That way we don't corner ourselves or corner other people into either like you're an addict or you're not an addict. And there's nothing in between, because that's a very helpless and that's a very defeating kind of label to have. And I think, even talking about the term drugs as well. So thinking about like, what constitutes a drug, what makes it bad, what is it because it's illegal? And I would argue maybe that like, I would probably say that like, no, it's not that it's bad because it's illegal. It's bad because it's causing you harm. You're not using it, like you said, in the way that it was intended to. So recalibrating kind of our belief system around what are drugs. Is it immediately something that's like, oh, cousin Sheila smoked pot the other day, she's clearly a bad youth, or
yeah,
I'm such a bad, I don't know, scenario putter upper, because for you, for me, we have this like compassion and understanding of the spectrum, but like it's an easy thing, especially with family, because there's that black sheep. And if you have this understanding of like drugs are bad, or they're either an addict or they're not, or they're always an addict, someone can be cast out, or they can be afraid to reach out to those people closest to them. So when we're discussing this and kind of exploring what it means to have a substance problem, what are the signs or symptoms of having it?
Yeah, those are some really great points you raised. And like, if we're going to be like, completely technical, like we are both consuming drugs right now by drinking coffee and tea. So again, like drugs aren't necessarily bad or need to be stigmatized. It's just, what type of drug and how are you using it, to your point earlier. So in the realm of substances, it's really helpful to think of substance problems, like I said, as a spectrum. And so in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5th edition, which is how doctors and psychiatrists, it's like the psychology handbook. It's how clinicians diagnose substance disorders. There are mild forms of it, moderate forms of it, and then severe forms of it, right? Substance use disorder. There are about like 11 or so indicators, and I'll just give you an example of some of them, like setting limits for use, whether it's like a time frame or quantity, and then breaking those limits. So if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go out and have one drink, be out for an hour, and then come home, but then it's 12 a.m. and I'm 5 drinks in, then that would be an example of that, right? Setting a intentional limit and then breaking it. Wanting to cut back but not being able to. So, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I lost my phone, I lost my wallet. I'm not going to drink for 2 weeks. And then the very next day or a few days later, you're back at it again. So wanting to cut back but not being able to, right? Or I can't, I have this pack of cigarettes and I'm going to make it last for a week and not being able to. So that would be an example of the second one.
Right.
Or actually, that would more so be an example of the first one, but like, okay, I'm not going to buy cigarettes for 2 weeks and then buying them again.
Right.
And then there are, so things like that, but also like the consequences of your use. Is it causing you problems in your relationship? Is it causing you to do risky things when you're on the drug? So in the case of drinking, is it causing you to drive drunk or, injure yourself? Are you getting into fights when you're drinking? Is it causing harms in your relationships? Is it making you unable to meet your commitments and responsibilities? Are you cutting back on other things that used to be important to you as a result of your use? And then finally, are the more like physiological effects of the drug? Like, are you using in more quantities? Like, is your tolerance increasing? Do you need more of the drug to feel the same way? And are you experiencing withdrawal, like discomfort, pain, without the substance? So those are some ways to think about it. And that's why, to your point earlier, addiction isn't a black or white thing. It can look very different for different people. They can have mild, moderate, or severe, depending on how many of those boxes they check. But those are some general ways to tell.
Do you find, or I feel like a lot of these things, they can easily be like deflected onto other people for a while. Like if you say like, oh, well, I wasn't gonna drink, but like my kid was a pain in the butt today and like it's their fault, or like my husband and I had a fight. So clearly like I needed to like smoke an extra 5 cigarettes to relax myself. Like, do you find that that people will often like deflect that responsibility and that kind of ownership?
Yeah, they will. And, a lot of times that's just denial. And a lot of the times there is some truth to that. Like there's people who are drinking in response to stressors in their lives, and they just like normalize it or habitualize it. And they think that, and they put the blame on that, which in a way is not exactly like incorrect, because when people drink, there usually is like a trigger that makes them drink. But it's, it is like a denial of like it. See, these things are like, they're really multifaceted and complex. And a lot of times you can't address the underlying issue until you remove the alcohol and you're able to think more clearly.
Right.
So it's all very like interrelated.
Yeah. And then it's different for everybody, that like light bulb moment where they're like, oh my God, it's me.
Yeah.
But, whenever let's talk for a little bit now when it's not us, and how, like, if we're living with a family member or if we have a friend or somebody like just in our social sphere, in our bubble, who's possibly going down this path where you might feel like they're already at like a farther end of the spectrum than you would like them to be, or you'd hope them to be. Like, how do you help or have that conversation in a way that's constructive and not just shaming, blaming, or any of that stuff that's very common?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head by mentioning trying to avoid shaming and judgment. I think that few people have ever been motivated to change because they've been shamed into it. It's usually not a very effective strategy, because what it ends up doing is make the person feel worse. And then which leads to more unhealthy use. But I would say first recognize the signs, which we went over before. So have um, awareness is the first step. And then how you talk about it, the setting, the tone that you use, staying calm yourself, because it's a very emotional topic, and if your partner or loved one responds with emotion, a lot of the times you're going to respond with emotion too. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're in a good mental and emotional space for having these conversations. But in general, saying things like, hey, I'm really worried, I'm really concerned, rather than you have a problem, you need to
Mhm.
get this fixed, you're out of control. Because language like that can make people really defensive, and it's very subjective language. It's like, what do you mean out of control? What do you mean what do you mean by problem? These are all open to interpretation. But you can say something like, hey, I'm really concerned because you've been drinking more than usual. And last few times you said you were just going to have one glass of wine and it turned into a couple more. And then the other day I saw you drinking by yourself and I'm just really worried about you. Is everything okay? That is totally different than, you know, you have a drinking problem, you're becoming an alcoholic, how could you drink alone? That's, such a bad thing to do, as a mother. Like, why, how could you do that? Like, it's totally different conversation, the
Yeah.
first one versus the second one. So recognize a sign, express concern, and make it less about their behavior than like how it's making you versus how it's making you feel. Like, I'm feeling really scared, I'm feeling really worried. And then suggest alternatives.
Yeah. I have this image of like the iceberg, where like if you're about to have this conversation with a person and you only see what's like the tip of the iceberg, like be prepared because there could be a whole ton of stuff that's going to
Mhm.
come up, or a
Yeah.
whole ton of stuff that you have no idea what you're about to get yourself into. So knowing that like coming from a place of love and a place of empathy
Yeah.
is the first step of at least just having that conversation. And we use alcohol and we use like cigarettes as like the examples, but there's a lot of different other substances, and you tied in gambling,
Mhm.
sex, what else was there? I mean, like
Spending.
heroin, cocaine, like, narcotics, prescription medications, anything mood altering. And it could be like a chronic shopper, or, someone who jokes about like, oh my God, I opened my second credit card during COVID because like I just kept finding these great deals on things. And like it could be really subtle, or just recognizing these little changes in the behaviors of the people around you.
Mhm.
And I think that's just another like testament to why it's important to learn to become an empathetic listener, and making sure that like, even though when you're expressing the concerns, that you're expressing concerns about how you feel, it's
Mhm.
not about you.
Mhm. It's not about making their behavior immoral or wrong in some way.
Yes, to fit like your perception of
Yeah.
what good and bad is. And this is, I mean, I don't know about anybody listening, but when you were talking and when we're having this discussion, this is a conversation that's had about food. I can't control myself around food. Oh, I'm addicted to chocolate. Oh, I walk into the kitchen and then before I know it, I've eaten like 8 Oreos and I wasn't even hungry. So I feel like these behaviors and habits leading into addictive behaviors or substance behaviors, they possibly apply to other behaviors as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Um, from like a diagnostic perspective, there's different ways that clinicians will diagnose, like food disorder versus gambling disorder. But a lot of the principles, apply, like setting limits, but not being able to, trying to cut back, but not being able to, um, engaging in the behavior in a way that causes your relationships stress or, causes yourself, any emotional, physical harm, the behavior progressing and getting more intense and more frequent. So a lot of that can definitely be applied to the whole spectrum of human behaviors and what makes us feel good. Ultimately, like these are just things that make us feel good, but if they go unchecked, then they can really, take over,
Yeah.
as opposed to you being in control and doing the behavior in a way that serves you.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you've worked with me as a coach. You know the language that I use. I don't believe in bad food. I don't believe in good food. Everything plays a role. And just like, so I'm bringing it back to like food behaviors because that's something a lot of us use as a coping mechanism. Sugary foods, fatty foods, salty, whatever your pick. But recognizing that like there is no good, there is no bad. With alcohol, alcohol is not bad. Drinking a ton of alcohol is unhealthy. So I use the language of like healthy versus unhealthy behaviors. Is what you're doing contributing to a healthy life that you want to live, or is it taking away from it? So using this as a kind of a litmus test in other behaviors that we might have been utilizing, extracurricular relationships, possibly. Like gambling, like online gambling, over shopping, misusing
Media.
social media. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have closed Facebook only to like without thinking automatically click the Facebook button again immediately after. And at that point I'm like, kind of need to put her phone down and walk away.
Yeah.
So recognizing that like these are it's okay. It's okay that you're at wherever you're at right now. But we encourage you to start asking yourself, having conversations with people you care about. Like, is this something that's contributing to the life you want to live? Or is this an opportunity maybe to recognize some unhealthy behaviors and get the proper help that we need? Because but like, I'm not equipped to manage certain like substance abuse, like with alcohol and with drugs and stuff, but it can certainly, like a coach, a fitness coach, a health coach, a nutritionist can help recognize what are unhealthy behaviors, what opportunities we can create there to develop healthier lifestyles. So as far as your scope of, your scope of education, like what's one action step or what's a few good resources if somebody listening would want to take to incorporate some of like what we talked about today?
It's a great question. I will probably stick specifically to substances since that is my area of expertise.
Yeah.
The biggest takeaway that I would want your listeners to have is that it's not an issue of morality. Like you said, it's not being a good person or a bad person because you use substances or not. It's not an issue of intelligence. Like, oh, how could I be so stupid? But it really is, like you said, a health issue. So approaching it from a health perspective allows you to opens the door for more compassion to yourself. So like if you're struggling with a substance, whether it's caffeine or alcohol or nicotine, be kind to yourself, and you have the power to stop. You have the choice. It usually entails work and help from other people, as I'm sure you're aware of. And there's communities out there and there's help for you. If you just do a little searching, you can find one for your specific issue. I found my process of change came through AA, but there's so many different recovery programs, so many books you can read, being part of a spiritual group, going to therapy, doing cognitive behavioral therapy. Like there's so many resources out there. Just don't be afraid to start the conversation, be kind to yourself in the process, and then take that first step. right? Like I forgot what that saying is, but like every journey,
Journey
something
of 1,000 miles starts
begins
with a
with
single step.
a single step.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then that single step will lead you to the next right action, not right action, the next best action for yourself, and then the next best action. And then that's how it gets done.
And you're a perfect testament to that. Sober 10 years and your family's growing again. And I'm so excited and happy for you. And thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for being here, Diana. I appreciate every single day that you're in my life.
Aw, I'm so happy as well.
So,
And bring another baby to our block.
you
It's gonna
first.
be exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Diana. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. And anyone who is listening, watching live, or on the replay, I'd love to hear your takeaways and answer any questions you have. If you have questions for Diana or want to connect with her, she is in the group. You're welcome to send her a message. And I think we could also post a few resources in the links in the comment section below. So whether you're watching live or the replay, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. And if you're not already in here, click that link to join the Strong as a Mother online community. Mamas, to live a healthy and happy life on the journey through motherhood, it takes a village. Come and join ours. So I can't wait to meet you. Until next week, stay strong, stay caffeinated, and I will see you in the group.